Imagine living in a world where expressing your true feelings was seen as a sign of weakness. For men today, that is exactly the case. And yet, at the same time, men are often told to man up. Look, this topic is not just a personal burden of mine, but it is a burden that I feel for the majority of men in society today. And it's something that I want to solve for. What's up, everybody? This is Ryan James Miller, and this is part 2 in a 7-part series that I've titled The Unstarved Man on my Unlocking Greatness podcast. And today I want to walk through, as we continue in this trajectory of talking about men's mental health, the emotional distresses, and really starvation of men tapping into their emotions today. I want to really talk about what it means to deal with so many of these challenges around stuffing our emotions, hearing that we should stuff our emotions, understanding what we should really be doing with those emotions, and in larger part, how society has played into all of that. And by the end of this episode, you'll not only understand the roots of where this all came from, because if we don't know where it comes from, we're not going to understand how to solve it. But not only will you understand the roots of where this came from, but you're going to be equipped with some practical tools that are going to help you start dealing with these emotions that you're feeling inside of yourself. And another thing here, ladies, don't check out. I said it in the last, in part 1 of this series. I'm going to say it through all 7 parts. You have a man in your life who is starved, who is struggling emotionally, who is struggling mentally, and more often than not, doesn't know what to do with it or where to go with it. And so please listen, please be engaged. Pay attention to how you can help your husband, your boyfriend, your friend, your brother, your uncle, your father, your child. It is so important that you listen in. And oftentimes, ladies, you are going to be the one that's going to be able to get through to that man in your life. Maybe you can share this episode with them later. And I'm also going to be sharing, by the way, a guide. You can look down in the description or in the show notes, and you'll be able to see a guide that is going to help walk you through a lot of this, called A Guide to Identifying and Challenging Negative Thoughts. So you can click and you can download that for free. Okay. What I want to talk about is 3 things specifically in this episode. Number 1, I want to talk about the impact of quote unquote toxic masculinity on emotional expression. So I'm going to get into that. 2, I want to talk about some of the historical trajectory that we've been on and why we have seen this rapid inclination in stuffing our emotions and confusion around how to deal with those things as men. And finally, I want to talk about some ways in which we can push back against these societal norms and ultimately become the men that I believe we've been created to be, who are, by the way, providers and protectors, not just of those closest to us, but for the common good of society today. And it's so interesting that that this topic comes up. You know, I've been planning for this series for a while now, and yet this topic comes up at a time in which my men's groups, I'm a part of a men's group of about 25 guys ranging from about 14 years old to in their early 80s. We meet every single Wednesday morning, 6:30 in the morning. We go through different books that we'll read together, and then we'll discuss chapter by chapter, heart issues, head issues, hands issues. Sometimes it's very practical. And we've been working through a book recently called The Toxic War on Masculinity by a phenomenal woman by the name of Nancy Pearson. And Nancy has done just a phenomenal job, Piercy, by the way, but she's done a phenomenal job of walking through this history of this war on masculinity. And at first I was very hesitant because it's like, what? Gosh, it's going to sound terrible. I was concerned that a woman writing this was going to come from a perspective that I may not agree with, because it's like, I'm a man, what does a woman know? And how ignorant was I to think that? She is so phenomenal in her thought, in her articulation of thought, in the data that she shares. She's just a phenomenal human being. Anyway, I want to kick this right off. I hate toxic masculinity. I hate both men that are toxic, but I also hate the abuse of that word and labeling everything that most men do as toxically masculine. I just think it's ridiculous. Men by nature are not toxic. Masculinity by nature is not toxic. As a matter of fact, Nancy, in the introduction to her book, I'm going to read two things as I talk about toxic masculinity first, is she says this. She says, I had to acknowledge that what God created, talking about men and masculinity, she says, I had to acknowledge that what God has created is intrinsically good. It is sin that has distorted and twisted his original good creation. The real problem is not an inherent flaw in masculinity itself. It's that American society has become secularized and has lost the biblical vision of manhood. And she finishes the introduction by saying the Bible calls men to be both tough and tender, both courageous and caring. Men who know they are made in God's image can be full persons, reflecting all the rich dimensions of God's own character. Now, you may be listening to this and you're like, Ryan, I ain't listening to this because you're talking about God and I'm not there. And I would say I'd be surprised if that's you at this point because I talk about God a lot. But don't check out because I want to help you regardless of where your faith is at, whether you have faith or not. And yet at the same time, I actually want to make a case today that says this: until you know who created you and what you were created for, you will struggle to ever live as the man you are destined to be. Society will never inform you of those things. And as a matter of fact, in just a few minutes, I'm going to talk about the distortions society has put onto manhood. But you will never, ever be able to live as your true self, as your whole self, if you don't know God. If you don't know the God of the Bible, if you do not know Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. Because apart from knowledge of God and apart from following Christ, you are going to live as slave to sin. There's much deeper theological implication to what I've just shared there, but it's just reality. If you want to be the man that you've been created to be, you've got to know your Creator and you got to know him well. You got to follow him. And as you do, he will reveal more and more of yourself to you. He will heal you of all of the toxic traits that you may have picked up over time from the society that we live in. Anyway, so toxic masculinity. You know, it's fascinating to me because I never really started hearing this word. I know that the idea has existed for a long time. I know the term has existed for a long time. But, you know, this idea has not existed publicly and prevalently until the last like 5 to 10 years, probably 5 years, probably 10 years, somewhere in that range. Don't fact check me because again, I'm just generalizing anyway. But it's been much more recent that this has really been imposed. And I spoke about this a little bit in my last episode, as well as future or previous episodes to that. But this idea of toxic masculinity has really taken rise at the same time that women are advocating for equality. What's crazy is we should not try to demonize one thing in order to elevate another. I am married to an amazing woman. I have 2 daughters that are 22 and 15, and I believe that God created not just those 3 women, but every single woman that he has ever and will ever create. I believe he has created them equal in worth, equal in value, and equal in his eyes to any man. And yet, sin has crept into this world and tried to belittle and diminish women over time. And so I understand that we are seeking to and need to elevate women to an equal position in society. But that does not mean we have to stomp out every man in the process. And so when men are exercising authority, even a healthy version of authority, when men are using their voice in society to call out wrong, they're often called toxic just for the sake of stomping them out, of trying to put them in their place. I understand that just a few decades ago, that there were many men that were abusing their role, that were abusing their power, that were abusing their physical strength to outpace women, to outpower women, to out-earn women. And that is all wrong. And that is, in fact, toxic. But that is a small fraction of the men in this world. And yet, every time that a man rises up, he starts being labeled. He starts being accused as though he only got there because he was a man, because he was a toxic man and abused the lane that he chose. Just because some men are, just because some men were, doesn't mean all men are. I know some idiots. I've been an idiot. There was times in my life when I was toxic, but I'm not now. And the men that I call my closest friends are not either. And I know many men that are doing incredible things in society today for the common good, as we were ultimately called to do when we were created in the first place. When God created man, he called him to tend to his earth. And that is what we are called to do. Tending does not mean lording over. It means ensuring that the common good is maintained. It is ensuring that people flourish, all people flourish. And I see many men doing that. Many, many men. That's how God intended men to behave, men to live, men to lead. Just because a man is a leader doesn't mean he's toxic. And yet, because there has been such a label imposed on men in general, men have retreated. Now, there's cowards that have just retreated for the sake of retreating, but men are afraid. They're afraid to step up. They're afraid to stand out. They're afraid to speak out. And when we can't speak out in healthy ways, respectful ways, but when we can't do that, we start to stuff our emotions. We fear speaking about them, whether that's anger or sadness. On top of that, because there have been some a-hole men, they have also put the fear into men about speaking out about their emotions, about their struggles with mental health, about being seen as weak. It's just a sad state that we're in. And yes, evil men have had ill effect on society and on other men, but society as a whole has. In many ways, and I'm going to get eye rolls from maybe one or two people that are listening to this, and I'm not sure why, but it is time that we elevate men back to the place that they should be, which is of amazing worth and an amazing value equal to that of women. Men are not evil. Men are not toxic just because they're men. Toxic men are those that abuse, that willingly sin, that commit evil against others. But that's not everybody. You know, as you look back to society over the course of time, just think about, I'm not an expert historian, but when you think back to biblical times and you look to virtue, when you look to exercises in strength and stature, they were the men that were doing that. They were the ones that were defending the defenseless. They were the ones on the front lines. They were the ones going out and hunting and providing back for the family. It wasn't because they were putting women in their place. It was because God had given them the strength to do that, to go out and hunt, to go out and defend, to go out and protect, to go out and fight. That was their calling. Fast forward. I mean, look to how our own country fought for and defended itself for the longest time. We sent men out onto the front lines of war, not because women were incapable, but because that was men's virtue. That was men's calling. A man would have never thrown a woman into the middle of violence. A good man wouldn't have. A good man would have never laid a hand on a woman, engaged in some evil act against a woman. All throughout history, from thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago until just recently, men took responsibility. Now, I'm not saying all men. Again, there's always been deadbeats. There's always been idiots. There's always been a-holes. There's always been jerks. But men, generally speaking, took responsibility. And then somehow we found ourselves in this place where it was inappropriate for a man to hold a door open for a woman. And you may be saying to yourself, Ryan, you are like going off on a crazy tangent. This has nothing to do with how I express myself as a man today. And I'm going to tell you, it has a lot to do. You're confused. You don't know how to act. You don't know what to do that's right. Everything can be wrong. You're questioning whether or not you should exercise authority or influence, whether you should step into a role of leadership, whether you should even express the fact that you've been hurt. You don't know what to say or not to say anymore. And it's because for so many thousands of years, having clear directive and calling, it's been distorted, it's been confused by a small minority that's doing everything they can to destroy God's perfect design of men and women. Society has rotted masculinity and manhood. Some bad eggs have destroyed it for so many of us. It's so important that as men today, we go back to biblical times and understand what it meant to be a man, to serve, support, protect, provide, to exercise strength for good, not for evil, to exercise authority when in the right places to do so, not to dominate, not to domineer, but to use what God gave you for good. But you see, part of the case that Nancy Pearcey makes, and I'm about halfway through her book right now, is that with the degradation of biblical morality in society, we have lost guidelines. We have lost the ethos of what made men good to begin with. And so my encouragement to you is to go back and read where men came from, the Bible. To go back and read about the virtues of a good man, the Bible. We can pick up on many things from Stoicism, from just history in general, but nothing will be as perfect in articulating true manhood and masculinity as the Bible will. The characters of the Bible are not perfect at all, apart from Jesus himself. But the way God works through them, the way God restores them, the way God uses them are always ideal demonstrations of character, virtue, things that we should be striving to model in society today. And again, as we do that, we are going to better understand how to deal, how to process, how to handle these things. When I wrote my book, one of the things that kept coming up time and time again for me was that whether I was being a total idiot or something was being done by somebody else to me that was hurtful to me, God was breaking down who I was trying to be, refining that person in order for me to see who he had created me to be. C.S. Lewis says, hardships often prepare ordinary people for an extraordinary destiny. That was what it was like for me. All of these things that I was going through. I mean, I wasn't well in tune with my emotions on a regular basis. I was raised by a single mom, and so I understood sympathy, empathy, because my mom had those characteristics. She was very loving and caring, and I tried to do that. But I didn't have good, clear guidelines around biblical manhood. I didn't have really any. And so I kind of just modeled what I saw in society. And as the result of that, I ended up just modeling what I saw around me, which turned into a lot of toxicity. And it took me being broken down. It took me screwing up or getting screwed up so bad to reveal to me who I had really been created to be. Which is why I created resources like that guide to identifying and challenging negative thoughts, because when I was struggling, I didn't know where to put it. I didn't know what to do with it. And so it would come out in fits of anger, in rage, fighting. It would come out in, and I'm going to talk about this in a future episode of this series specifically, but it came out, or I dealt with it by masking it with self-medication. I stuffed it a lot of times because I was afraid for people to see and hear how I really felt, because that would I believed that somehow would dent my image. But society, my ultimate choice, but society was doing that to me. It was society's influence. It was the circumstances around me, the people that I was putting myself with. And it took me so long to understand why I was going through all the things I did, how to process and deal. And so now as I deal with them, because those things don't go away, the challenges of life, now I just know how to better deal with them. I have the tools that help equip me to deal with the challenging and negative things that happen on a daily basis, weekly basis, running a business, being a husband, a father. Life is not easy. I also have learned over time to surround myself with the right types of men. Women too, but definitely the right types of men. That that idea that we are the product of the people that we surround ourselves the most. Man, have I learned that one the hard way. But as I've learned that one, I've recognized that the people that I want closest to me are those that are better than me. Better men, better husbands, better fathers, better leaders in their community. I want good character, good virtues modeled for me because I will strive then to replicate them. You see, while society as a whole may be trying to silence me and silence how I'm trying to process and deal with the struggles of the world today, there are good men out there that are fighting for me, that are fighting on my behalf to see me ultimately become the man that God has created me to be. This is one of the reasons why our Founders Collective community is so incredible. You can click in the show notes to learn more about that. But this was about surrounding myself with men that I could model my life after. I mean, we're all unique. We're all different. We're all going to have different types of pursuits and different types of personalities. But I want to model my life after theirs in the sense that they demonstrate the character that I want in my own life, that I want to model for those around me. It's incredible to me that expressing emotion, that talking about mental health in a day and age when mental health is being talked about so much can still be seen as so negative. And men, I want to give you the permission. I am one guy, but I want to give you the permission to speak freely about the things you struggle with, to speak freely about your shortcomings, your failings. And I want to give you permission for two reasons. Number one is because it is the most freeing thing in the world when you can openly speak about the things that you think are enslaving you. And two, you go first and watch as others will follow. People are looking to you and waiting for you to influence them to do the same. I admire men that are open about their struggle. There's obviously contexts that are more appropriate than others, but I admire men that are willing to be open and honest about the things that they struggle with, especially when they're on a journey to try and grow from them. And you can do that. You can be that type of man. It's healing and cathartic when you can open up about that and when you can talk through it with somebody else, especially when they're coming to you for guidance, because maybe you're just a step ahead of them. It's so healing. It's so helpful. As we wind this down, I want you to understand that ultimately, you were created for so much good. You were created to lead well, to love well, to serve well. But as time has gone on and as sin has crept farther and farther into this world, as we have abdicated responsibility, as we have pushed God out of our guide, he's not just, but as our guide to how we should live our life, we are dealing with the ill effects. We're struggling more and more to understand who to be and how to be that person. And so for fear of not screwing up worse or not knowing what to do or being looked at a certain way, we've been covering it up more and more and more. But that's not okay. And that's not the way that it needs to be. And as I was explaining, you have tools available to you. Read the Bible. Engage in a tool. Maybe read my story. If you're like, the Bible's not for me, or maybe you're like, I've read the Bible and I just can't quite get it, pick up a copy of my book, Wounds. I can almost guarantee you will relate to one or more of the 9 significant events in my life that have helped me to learn and grow in these areas, to not just heal the wounds, but to grow in my healthy mental health. I'm still on a journey. I'm still going, but it's getting better. I also encourage you, as I have before, to surround yourself with men that you admire. Not simply because they're ahead of you, not simply because they're more successful than you, but most importantly, because they demonstrate the characteristics of a man you want to become. Providers, protectors, gracious, loving, servant-hearted, supportive, patient, kind. Those are all characteristics of great men. Those are the men that you should ultimately surround yourself with. And as you do that, you will pave a path towards an incredible future. Just because society, in many ways, has put us into a very difficult position doesn't mean we have to stay there. Just because society has used some powerful levers to pull to put us in the position that we're in does not mean we have to stay there. We can fight our way out. We no longer have to starve our emotions. We no longer have to suffer with the struggles of mental health issues. There is a path out. There is a path for you. It is one that God has created for you. And it is one that is encouraged by and supported by so many men. Find your tribe. I am happy to be a part of that tribe with you, to serve you and support you in any possible way that I can. And as always, you guys, thank you so much for supporting this podcast, these episodes, my journey. It's been incredible to be on this journey with you. I want you to, if you haven't, go back and listen to episode 1. This will give you some more context for this series. Subscribe to my YouTube channel because we're doing a lot of content outside of just this podcast series on topics just like this. How to succeed, all while not destroying your life. How to deal with the mental and emotional battles that we face on a day in and day out basis. How we stay mission-minded and aligned, all while we pursue the professional success that we believe we're destined and called to achieve. It's all here, and it's all here for you. Thank you guys so much for your support. Make sure to share this episode with somebody else you love. Click on another video. Check out some of the other stuff that we're doing and comment below. Let us know what we should be doing next. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate you so much. This is episode 2 in the 7-part series on the Unstarved Man. I cannot wait to share episode 3 with you. We're going to talk about vulnerability, how to become more vulnerable, some good ways and bad ways to do that. So we're going to open up a lot more about that. I'm going to get pretty raw and vulnerable as well. Thank you guys so much. Talk to you soon.